got me interested in Hamilton? I think it's partly a question of timing and partly a question of me that first got me interested in Hamilton. The bicentennial helped a lot in getting me interested in this time period. I was of the right age, I don't know, 11, 12, 13 during the bicentennial, which is that moment where if something grabs you, it's really going to grab you. The bicentennial was everywhere, right? Every commercial, every advertisement. It would be hard to exaggerate the degree to which the founding period was everywhere. So I began reading biographies. I went to the library and I started with A, and I think my plan, my ambitious little plan, was to work my way through. When I got to Hamilton, I stopped because the beginning of his life was really strange. He was born in the Caribbean. He was, not well off. It was illegitimate. There was the weirdness about the beginning of his life, and of course the end of his life was dramatic. And as a young person, I saw a young person who was dying to get out into the world and do things, and I think I identified with that. He was interesting, but the biography that I read, which I will not name, I didn't like. I didn't believe it. So I went, and I wish I could reconstruct why I didn't believe it. I don't remember why. But I remember I went to the library, and I asked the librarian, what did the person who wrote this book read that gave him the right to say what he said? And she pointed me to the 27 volumes of Hamilton's papers. I don't know if there were 27 at that time, but maybe there were. At any rate, his written papers, the record of everything he's written. So I pulled one of those off the shelf, and that to me was, like the angels sang. I was like, oh, this is the real history, right? This isn't somebody telling me about something. This is the person. So I began reading those volumes, and I never stopped. And I didn't know historian was a job. I'd never really known anyone personally who was a professor. There was no goal in mind. It was just, I began reading at volume 1. I read my way through, and then I would finish, and I would go back, and I would do it again. And you do that for long enough, and you really get to know something about a person and their patterns and habits of thought and their emotions. And Hamilton particularly is a weirdly self-destructive, very emotional character. So, and he's not someone who tends to confess a lot about, he doesn't muse on paper very often. So if you're going to understand him, you really have to look for the patterns. So I began to realize that I was seeing patterns and understanding things about him that didn't seem like other people were. But that was like my little private thing that I did forever. And it wasn't until I was much older that people started to find out that there was this crazy person who knew more about Alexander Hamilton than anybody else. And I began to be hired as a consultant and sort of found my way into history as a profession. But initially, it was just his letters. It was just the writings and getting the real stuff of history in my hand and understanding he sat at a desk and wrote this, and what did it mean, and why did he say it, and what can I find out about him? For a Hamilton scholar, the last few years have been very interesting. No one knew who he was. I was wandering around talking about Hamilton and trying to say to people, you've never heard of this guy, but he's really important. Let me explain why. Now I walk around and say to people, he's not so great, calm down about Hamilton. So I was already the crazy person who knew a lot about Hamilton, and then this moment exploded. Early on, through one way or another, I sort of ended up in the circle of Lin-Manuel Miranda, and while the play was at the Public Theater. And because I was the crazy Hamilton person, I got to have a number of conversations with him in which he wanted to talk about Hamilton and ask me questions about Hamilton. When I went to see the play, I then discovered that there's a song in the play, The 10 Dual Commandments, which is based on part of my first book, Affairs of Honor, and that the understanding of dueling in the play is pretty much based on my work on it. So in a bunch of different ways, I ended up getting connected to the play, and then once it became so well known, then obviously schools wanted me to come and talk about it, and different kinds of groups wanted me to come and talk about the real history behind it. So one of the fascinating things about this Hamilton-Orama moment that we're living in is that it really has opened up this kind of hunger to learn more about that time period, which as a teacher makes me a very happy camper. It's hard to predict what's going to happen with Hamilton Mania. On the one hand, I would assume it's going to go on for a while because this play is going to travel around the country, and then high schools are going to be performing it, and the music is floating around. So I assume it's going to have a long life. I don't know that. It's also hard to predict that another period or person might have that kind of a hold. I think this was a combination of a creative mind and a subject and a moment in time and a form of expression that all kind of bundled together in a great kind of a way and erupted. That doesn't happen all that often. I think and hope part of what the play's existence will do is to teach people that this period is interesting, that it wasn't ordained in advance what was going to happen, that the people in that period, whether they're founding fathers or other folk as well, were people trying to figure out what they were doing as they went along, that there was contingency, all of these things that people don't assume about the founding. Just that kind of understanding, I think, will enrich the way people, kids, study history.